Hello, everybody. Good morning. Let's do our second to last section. This will be a pretty easy week. And then next week, I think will also be pretty simple too. And these are our last 2 weeks. Okay. Today, whoops, that's not the right one. Today we are going to talk about classification. So we spent the last week talking about evolution and how we get new species and things like that. And classification is the way that we group these species together to identify living organisms. So this is a scheme, which means like an order of things, to group living organisms. And specifically, this is based on genetics. Now, it used to be in classification 2 different ways. There was a scheme that was called artificial classification. And in artificial classification, people would first select like some arbitrary characteristic, like let's say, for example, they would just say fur. And then they would put everything with fur into that little thing. And then they would say, okay, everything with teeth. And they would put, like everything with teeth into that group. And then later on, they figured out like, oh, this causes some problems because there's some characteristics that are shared between organisms that seem to be related that may not be related. Okay, and so that switched up to a second version that was called natural classification. And in natural classification, they first figured out the similarities and then identified the characteristics. So they would say, instead of saying fur and then putting things in that category, they would put a bunch of things that seemed to be alike into that category and then figure out what it was that they had in common. So that allowed them to try to find deeper underlying characteristics that allowed them to, what's the word I'm looking for? Find some deeper underlying characteristics that sort of showed that they were related to each other. But there's a problem with this one, and the problem with natural classification is that and this is exactly what we know from natural selection. Individuals change, those characteristics that things have changed because of mutations and things like that. So the kind of classification that is used nowadays is something called phylogenetic classification. And this is based on genetics. And so, if you have homologies in your DNA, then that is evidence of close relationships. Okay, so how does this kind of classification work? All right, I've got a picture I'm going to add in here. All right, so we're going to learn all of these terms here in just a minute, but maybe you've heard of things like kingdom and phylum, and we've definitely talked about the genus and species of organisms and things like that. So this is what we call the hierarchy of organization, and that is that everything goes into a set group of characteristics. And so, for example, the things that are found in kingdom Animalia all have certain things in common. They are all eukaryotic, and they are all made of animal cells. But then when we get down to chordata, This gets rid of some things. So chordates are things with a dorsal nerve cord. Dorsal means that it runs along your back, kind of like your spinal cord, except the spine is a bunch of bone around that nerve cord. There are things that have the nerve cord but no spine. And you can see that butterflies, insects, we could count starfish and sponges and corals don't fall into this category, and so they get lost. So they are not a part of this phylum. But everything in this phylum has that in common. Underneath phylum, we have class. Then there's mammals. These are things with hair. They give live birth. They nurse their young. That gets rid of fish. Then we go carnivora. So these are carnivorous things. It gets rid of elephants. Then we have Canidae. So Canidae are things that are related to, like they have dog-like characteristics. It gets rid of lions. We have Canis, which gets rid of the foxes. And then finally we have our dog that we know, which has a scientific name of Familiaris. So this has been really interesting as far as kind of learning things goes. As our technology gets better, we're able to figure out that some of the classifications that things were in aren't actually in. And so as we're able to see DNA and read DNA, sometimes things get reclassified. For example, us. So it was originally thought that there's this group of organisms called the Hominidae. And under Hominidae, you had the gibbons, you had all of the apes, and then you had us. But in a DNA analysis, it turns out that the orangutans, humans, chimps, and gorillas were all much more closely related than we thought. So under Hominidae, the gibbons are its own separate group over here. But then it turns out that under those hominids, all four of these apes fell. Orangutans are a little bit different, so they're over here. And then gorillas, chimps, and humans are all very similar to one another. Gorillas branched off here, and we are so similar to chimpanzees. In fact, like 98% of our DNA is the same as a chimpanzee. And so now some people consider this a disadvantage, but it's not really a disadvantage to say like that this classification can change. That's actually, I don't know, that's kind of a strength. So as new information arises, these classifications can change. And some people think of that as a disadvantage of this classification scheme. But I think the ability to create a scheme that can adapt and change as new information is discovered is actually kind of a strength. I think that's really, really cool. All right, so how do we classify things? So the first thing we need to remember, and this is something that we talked about when we talked about immunity, is that everything in life can be grouped into 3 different domains. Those domains are eukarya, I got that one wrong. That was the old one that I was taught when I was younger. Okay. Archaea and eubacteria. So eukarya, this is easy. That's us. Anything that's made of anything that's made of eukaryotic cells, which means that they have membranes on the inside. And we know that because we have things like a nucleus and a Golgi and the powerhouse of the cell, and so on and so on and so forth. Okay. Eubacteria, these are your typical prokaryotes. Your typical bacteria, when you think of bacteria like, E. coli and syphilis and all those kinds of things. And then finally we have archaea. These are also bacteria, but not bacteria that you are familiar with. These are bacteria called extremophiles. They have a really unique set of characteristics that allow them to live in really acidic environments or hot environments or really salty environments, kind of like Simone. Anyway, so these have a little bit of a different chemistry to them because they live in such crazy extreme environments. So I've got a nice breakdown of this. You don't need to know all of these. You don't need to know all of these at all. You just need to know the list that I showed you up top here. But archaea possess all of these characteristics here. Their membrane lipids have branches in them. They're the only thing on the planet that have that, which is why they can all be grouped together. Their chromosomes are circular, just like bacteria's are. We already knew that, so they share that in common. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have a nuclear envelope. Their DNA just floats around in their cytoplasm, just like bacteria. And they don't have membrane-bound organelles like Golgis and mitochondria and lysosomes and chloroplasts and things like that, just like bacteria. Now, those are the only things that they have in common with bacteria, but they do have some things in common with us. Their first amino acid in proteins is always methionine, just like us. They do not have this molecule called peptidoglycan in their cell wall, just like us. Bacteria do. Streptomycin, which is an antibiotic, and chloramphenicol, which are also antibiotics, don't inhibit them. They have histones on their DNA, just like us. And they have different kinds of RNA polymerases, just like us. So, we have these things in common with those archaea, but the thing that makes them completely unique is that their lipids in their membranes can be branched. So instead of just this, it could be like this. And those branches make them incredibly unique. So that's the first step of classification, and normally we don't include that step when we do a whole classification scheme of things. So what is the rest of the classification scheme? So what this is called the hierarchy of taxa. This word taxa refers to any group of classification. Okay, so for example, back here, let's go back here. If I was to refer to hominidae, I would be referring to all of these things. But if I was only to refer to hominini, I would only be referring to these two things. This is a taxa, and this is a taxa right here. They're both taxa. So when you're referring to a specific taxa, you have to be careful about clarifying which one it is that you're doing. So we're going to go through these words right here now. K, P, C, O, F, G, S. This is the order that they go in from largest to smallest. And they stand for kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, finally species. So everything falls into these 7 categories. Domain is on the top, but like I said, it's not something that we normally will say. If you need something to help you remember these things, there is a good acronym for these. Katy Perry came over for grape soda. You can come up with all kinds of crazy ones, though. I had a student a long time ago who came up with Kish plays crazy online fantasy games sometimes, which I thought was really funny. But I'm a 45-year-old biology teacher, and to this day, when I have to remember these, I still say Katy Perry came over for grape soda, because it just doesn't go in the same order as all of our other stuff. It's not alphabetical, so it's unique. So, how does this work? Well, I'm going to show you a website that is going to be really helpful to you. And actually, when it comes time for us to assess on this, you're going to be using this website here. All right. So this is called, this website is the Animal Diversity Web. And when it comes time to assess this, IB wants you to know one animal and one plant classification scheme from top to bottom. But obviously we can't really do that online. And so what we're going to do is instead I'm going to give you an animal and you have to be able to use this website and tell me the whole classification for it. So you get the website right in front of you. That's awesome. So here we go. Let's talk about the Animal Diversity Web. It's real easy to find, and it's run by the University of Michigan. And when you're given an animal, like if I was to tell you to look up the great white shark, you would come here, and it'll tell you that it is in Kingdom Animalia. We're going to skip a couple of these because they're not in one of our 7 classifications. So what comes after Kingdom? That is phylum. So it is in phylum Chordata. Okay, I couldn't get this all in one screenshot, so I need to get my other picture up here. All right. And there we go. There's our Chordata. Okay. We're going to skip this one because it's not one we need to know. We're going to skip this one. We're going to skip this one. What comes next? Class. Class is Chondrichthyes. Chondrichthyes means that it has a skeleton made of cartilage instead of bone. We don't need to do that. Order. Order Lamniformes. Family Lamnidae. And the genus is Carcharodon. And the species is Carcharias. So its classification from top to bottom is that it belongs in Kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Chondrichthyes, which it shares with like the rays and things like that, order Lamniformes, which makes it a shark, family Lamidae, genus Carcharodon, and species Carcharias. So this brings us to its scientific name. Its scientific name. The scientific name is always genus, and that first letter of the genus is going to be capitalized, and then species, and its whole species name is going to be lowercase. And this word must be underlined. So the scientific name of a great white shark is Carcharodon Carcharias. Underlined. And so there's a huge benefit to this. Number one, this set of rules was set by like a whole bunch of scientists across the world. And by using this common language, then communication between scientists of different languages and different countries can be easy to do. It also, because of this classification, allows us to make subgroups of these things to maybe group things even closer in similarity. And it allows us to look at an organism and predict where it falls based on certain characteristics. And so if you were to discover a new species, the first thing we would do is try to figure out what other things it's like, and we can place it in a certain place. So you'll notice that there's like subphylums. You don't have to know those. We have a class here. There's also a superclass. There could be a suborder or even a subspecies. So, for example, they call us Homo sapiens sapiens, which refers to modern man, which is real interesting. So you're going to have to do this for one plant and one animal species. So you can't use this website, the Animal Diversity Web, for the plant. So instead we use a different website here. It's going to be, and write this down in your notes so that you know how to get there when we do this, plants.sc.egov.usda.gov/Java. So you're going to pause the video really quick and write that down. Okay, you're back. All right, so let's go to our plant website. Okay, so on our plant website, we're going to type in the name of a plant that we want right here. So in my case, I wrote down daffodil. I don't know why I wrote one dash there, sorry. Daffodil, and we select common name here. So the common name is what we would commonly call something. Up here, the common name is the great white shark. We don't often refer to things by their scientific name. Some things we do, like E. coli. That's its genus and species name shortened. E is actually short for its genus, which is Escherichia. Okay, so we look for the common name. We change this search right here to the common name. And then when it comes up, we click classification and we get our whole rank right here. And you can see we've got a couple of those ones we don't worry about, like subclass, subkingdom, superdivision. And for some reason, they changed how plants go. Plants don't go by a phylum. Instead, plants don't go by, I said that right. Plants don't go by phylum, they go by division. But a division is the same thing as a phylum. So plants are in Kingdom Plantae. So this is the daffodil. Phylum Magnoliophyta, which are the flowering plants. Class Liliopsida, which are a certain kind of group called monocots. Order Lilialis, family Liliaceae, genus Narcissus, and species, the species is just Bulbocodium. So the scientific name of this plant is its genus, which is Narcissus, and its species is Bulbocodium. Narcissus bulbocodium is the scientific name of this particular organism. So all of these scientific names are part of a naming system that the whole world uses called the binomial naming system. And another word that scientists use to refer to naming systems is nomenclature. So binomial nomenclature is something you're going to see pop up, and binomial nomenclature just refers to the fact that we refer to all of these living organisms by their two-word scientific name. Okay, that's it for today. Bye-bye.